Hey everybody! Today I am doing a book review on Dawn of Spies by Andrew Lang. It is a middle grade series about two kids who were stranded on an island, and when they get picked up they get recruited by a spy corporation to help um, save a duchess from kidnapping and bring down a group called the Circle of 13. So when I first read the synopsis, I had a feeling it wasn't going to be a good book because it seemed like they were just trying to fit too much in. However, I did end up liking the book, so I thought it'd be a good book to do a review on. I've been thinking about how I want to do my review because I kind of wanted to start going a little bit more in depth with the books that I look at and really think about what I want as a reader, and I wanted to be able to give you a really good feel about the books, not just a general like or dislike. And so I came up with a system that I'm going to try out with this book, and we'll see how it goes. And it's probably more complicated than necessary because that's what tends to happen when I start making things up. But I like lists, I like exacts, I like a system, and so we're going to try this out. So I am going to be reviewing on some different categories. I'm going to be reviewing on character, plot, world, and then I may give a bonus. For me as a reader, character is one of the main things I look for. You may be totally different, so if you're someone who prefers world building, then you know that my reviews may not give you a full picture because it's not something I put as high up on my list. I don't need in-depth details to fall in love with a book as far as the world. However, if I don't like the characters or the relationship, or if they're not believable, or if they're too over the top, it's not going to be a good book for me. So character is really important. So is plot for me. They almost go hand in hand. Even if I have great characters, if the plot's really slow, it may not be a favorite of mine. So I'm going to break down each of these for you. You can see world has less points, not because I think less of it, but literally I just couldn't come up with 5 categories. So as I'm going, if you think of a category that I should be adding to any of these, please make sure you put it in the comment down below. Also, just because I added the bonus, my end total is 72. Not ideal, but it is what it is. So we're going to start out with character for this book. There are 2 main characters, and they are Robinson and Friday. They're both teenagers, it seems like, in the book, at like most 18. And so those are the 2 that I'm going to focus on for most of this. Here are my 5 categories for character. The personality of the main group, relationships between the main characters, the character development. Do we get to see them grow? Do they come to any major life-changing conclusions? And then the side characters. Do they fall flat, or are they diverse? Do we get backgrounds for them? Do we feel connected to them? And representation. How diverse is this cast of characters? So you can get a 5 out of each of these. Now, this is a middle grade, so I am going to be ranking this, or I have different expectations for this than I do a high fantasy like Lord of the Rings. I may give this book a 5 in relationships, and that 5 may be totally different than the relationships I would expect to see in Lord of the Rings and give a 5 to. So if I give a 5 to this, you've got to keep in mind the context of, like, this is a middle grade, and if I set myself up to have the same expectations for middle grade and high fantasy, I'm not ever going to enjoy a middle grade. So we are definitely working with a middle grade. Okay? So with all that being said, the 2 main characters are really enjoyable. Both of them are very lovable, and I think you start rooting for them almost right away, especially Friday. She's one of my favorite characters. She's a good representation of a strong female. I would say you don't see quite as many flaws. They're not a flawed character. Their personality is kind of you see what you get. There isn't a lot of depth to them, but they are enjoyable, lovable, and you definitely root for them. So I would give personality for the main characters a 4 out of 5. I would say the only thing I would want more of, I want to see them not be quite so perfect. We just don't get to see, we get to see some of their struggles, but we don't get to see the negativity that that may bring to their personalities. The next is relationship. The relationship between the two main characters was really well done. Like, I was surprised at how much I enjoyed the dynamic between the two. There is a hint, not even a hint of romance. There's a crush there for sure, but it never really goes beyond that. So if you're looking for romance, this probably isn't going to be what you're looking for, except for maybe the potential is definitely there. However, their friendship is really intense because they did survive on this island together and they had to work together, and they've saved each other several times. So you get that bond of just absolute trust between the two of them. They also, in their relationship, can kind of sense what the other is thinking or going to do or how they feel. It's almost like that, you know, like twin bond that people talk about. It's kind of like that, and they even bring up almost a magical realism aspect to it of like, is this more than just us surviving together? Is there a true bond where we can kind of sense what the other is doing? And that comes up quite a bit, especially the farther you get into the book, and it was really enjoyable. I always believed in their relationship. It never felt forced, and yes, there was a little bit where I was like, maybe it is too easy for you guys to just know what the other is doing, but I think that was supposed to be part of the story. So again, I really enjoyed the relationship. I would give that a 4 as well. The friendship, on point. Character development. Because they don't really have flaws, there is nowhere for them to go as far as development. The only real development is their realization of how much they rely on each other, how much they need each other, and maybe a little bit of like, how do I actually feel about this person? But as far as them developing as characters, there isn't much of that. I don't think that was supposed to be the point of the story. The story is very much an action driven, plot driven story, and so the development of the characters is lacking. It is definitely the first book, so there's a potential for that. The fact that they don't have any outright character flaws means there isn't really that much room to grow as characters. So I would give this pretty low. I think probably a 1. It just isn't there, and that's okay. It wasn't the focus of the story, but I think it is something that I look for in stories. So if you're looking for that as well, if you're wanting to see these characters grow, you're not going to get that. Side characters is also something that I had a problem with in this story. There are a lot of good side characters, but they are all very flat. There is nothing about them. Here's this captain, he is this person, he is strong. That's it. You don't feel connected to any of them, at least I didn't, and you don't get background on them, you don't learn about them. They are just there to push the two main characters' story along. Now, there is one side character that showed up, and I was very surprised because it's a real person. And for whatever reason, the image I had of this real person, it's a historical figure. The way they portrayed this person is not how I pictured this person. To be fair, I don't know much about this historical figure, but it just did not line up at all. And so I really struggled most, honestly, with this story, with the side characters. So I would give this a 1 as well. They were all enjoyable. I just didn't get enough depth at all. We have representation. This book did an okay job with representation. Friday is Caribbean. She lived on a ship almost all of her life because her father is a pirate king. So there is some representation there, and there also is a few times where it's brought up that people are treating her differently because of her skin color, so there is a little bit of that discussing issues. It's not a lot. Aside from Friday, though, there isn't very much, but again, mainly that's because there just isn't much known about the side character. So there could be more representation and I just missed it or it wasn't stated. I would give it I would give it a 3. It's kind of middle of the road. So, total for character, we get 13 out of 25. Middle of the road. For plot, I also have 5 categories. These are a little bit more abstract. I kind of squished some things together that I don't know. Some stories that may work, some stories that may not. And we also have some things that may not be applicable for every story. So I have timeline and pacing. Did it feel like a quick read? Did it feel like slow in some parts? Did the timeline make sense, or was it kind of all over the place? The action and things I'm considering here, was the action believable? Was the action well described? Was I engaged in it, or did I kind of not care? Buy-in and satisfaction. This is, I think, did I want to read this? Was I enjoying it throughout? And then satisfaction really is the ending. Did I feel like I got the ending I wanted? Which is maybe different for the first book in a series than it would be a standalone. But there's still that, did I get what I needed out of the story? Were there pieces that were left open? Did some things come to a conclusion that just wasn't what I wanted? Magic system, obviously, some books are going to have this, some books are not. This book has a little bit of magical realism, so I'm still going to leave this one in here. And then conflict. Was the problem one that deserved a book? Like, was it a small little issue that there was no real reason to write about? Was the villain a good villain? I'm going to start with timeline and pacing. This was a really easy read, a quick read, which I think you find a lot with middle grade. But I also felt like it was enjoyable and the pacing made sense. There are also flashbacks to their time on the island, which I really enjoyed. I wanted a little bit more of that because it was really exciting, but I felt the amount that they put in made sense. So I'm actually going to give this a 5. I think as timeline and pacing goes, there isn't really any more that I could have wanted from this. Next up is action. There is a lot of action in this book. It is mainly a story about spies, pirates, kidnapped Duchess. So action is the main focus here. There are a lot of fight scenes that were pretty well described. I think there were some times where I had a hard time picturing exactly what the movements were, but overall they were enjoyable. They were well timed. It didn't seem to go on too long or, kind of be skipped over. The only thing I would say is there were definitely times where the heroes were just doing things that I was like, that's not, people can't do that. That's not a thing. Or like that feeling of like, you should have been way more injured than you are. So a little bit of that like hero protection. I would probably give it a 4. Like, the only thing I would dock points for is the non-believability of it. Buy-in and satisfaction. I bought into this story. I really did. However, I think I needed more to truly be satisfied. Again, this is the first book in a series, and you can definitely tell the ending was setting up for other things, but the last big battle and how it ended just didn't quite fulfill what I was looking for. Friday's father is a pirate king, also kind of looking for her, and that part of the story I just wanted more of, and it was kind of like kept being hinted at here and there, and then came back a little bit, but just not really. Yeah, so I'm going to give this a 3. I think it was middle of the road. Like, I definitely enjoyed the story. I bought into it. I'm not expecting everything to be wrapped up nice and neat, but I do think there were a few things that could have been played into more and more explained. Magic system. So there is only one magical artifact. It plays a big role in this. However, it is not explained at all. It does have a very vague backstory, which brings religion into it. It felt unnecessary for me. I know kind of what this object can do, but most of the story is them working against that group around that object and not really focusing on that object at all. So yes, magic system isn't really part of this, but I do think the fact that there is a magical element that they are fighting for and it's not explained brought that down a little bit for me. So I'll give this a 3 as well. It's not a big portion of the story, but the part of it that is there isn't very in-depth at all. Conflict. There is one main villain in this and a few side villains. You're also battling against a group called Circle of 13. And so there is a lot going on there. There were, again, like I've said before, a few things that weren't very in-depth. So really the lack of depth. And it is a middle grade, but I've seen middle grades that go farther into things, and I feel like there was a potential for that. You know, a few more sentences of description, one more fact here or there, and it would have been fine. So it's not like I expect a longer story. I just needed like a sentence or two more scattered throughout to really just bring it all together. And I think there wasn't a lot of surprise, per se. There is one little twist that I kind of saw coming, which they do. They give you foreshadowing. They definitely lead into it. It's not really a twist. It is just a reveal that you're like, okay, yeah. But I do feel like the story followed in a progression that made sense. The villain was not as villainous. He was just a bad guy. There wasn't any depth to him at all, which again, back to characters, any of the side characters, there wasn't depth. So overall, another just middle of the road. It's like they get 18? Yeah, 18. Here are my 4 categories for worlds. Lore / history, depending on whether the world in this story is real or made up, would be based on that. Settings and details. Is the setting very descriptive? Do we get details of the world around us, from clothing to rooms to nature? Do we get that? Society and culture. Is the culture, especially if it's new, is it explained? And backstory. Do we get backstory for the characters specifically? Not necessarily the lore of the world, but backstory specific for characters and building their personal world. This one I wasn't as sure about because it feels like maybe I've gotten into that already with like characters and stuff, but I just feel like I want more here. So let me know, or maybe I should just make these 3 things worth more. I don't know. We're going to stick with this one for now. Let me know if you have any advice. So, lore and history. This is set in real world with a few, magical realism type things. Mainly we're looking at the history. I haven't looked up whether it's like completely accurate to the time. It's set in the 1600s. I would say it does a good job of using like weaponry that makes sense. Again, I didn't look up to see like one of the weapons is a crossbow. I don't know if a crossbow is specific to the 1600s or if it wasn't invented until the 1700s. They were on ships. They had carriages, horses, so that part of it made sense. Everything worked. You didn't get a lot of look into it, but I think since it's our world, I'm not expecting a lot of lore building. I don't need to know how things were created or came into being. And so, again, I would give this middle of the road. There wasn't a lot that I needed to know, but it stayed true to the time in my mind. Setting and details, it did not go much into setting and details at all, which personally I am okay with. I do not like long descriptions of everything around me. I tend to find myself skimming over those or even skipping them and having to make myself go back and read them. So I'm okay with not getting a close look at every single thing. However, I'm sure a lot of readers enjoy that. So I would say it didn't quite give enough for the average reader. I would say there is almost no description at all. I need to be better at this because it could be that I just skimmed over it, to be honest. I'll give it a 2 because I feel like I don't remember any descriptors. Again, I know that's just me partially, but usually I remember at least that, okay, there was a lot of description or not. So it's one of those like too much or too little. You could lose points, and I think this loses points for too little. Society and culture. It did a good job of upholding those. I would have liked more on the culture of the pirates and the Pirate King, but I think because it is so action-packed, culture and society aren't really playing a part in it. They don't need to know those mannerisms to be successful in their storyline. I would say a 4. There is also some information towards the beginning about how news travels in the shipyards and with different things, and I really enjoyed that. And I think it gave me just enough, especially for this style of book where I'm not expecting that to be a real well-rounded thing. Backstory of characters. This, I think, they were hinting at a lot of things, so it's hard to give it a specific rating because I feel like it was one of those things where they're setting it up to be more important in the next few stories. I don't remember how many books are in this series. I feel like 2, but it may be 3. But we do get, again, flashbacks to their time on the island, a little bit about each of their stories and where they came from. And so overall, I was okay with their backstories. It was the villain's backstory, the magical artifact, the backstory even for the Duchess who's kidnapped, that was all very lacking. So I would say this is right down the middle. So here we get 13 for World. I am not going to give it any bonus points. So let's see kind of how this ends up, what our total is. Give me a second to do some math. So it looks like we end up with a total of 44 out of 72, which if you're doing a percentile is about 60-61%, which makes sense, a little bit over half, a 3 out of 5. So that's my rating system. Let me know what you think, especially with World, as far as world building, because I would love to add more to this. I feel like because it's not something I personally am focused on, I'm struggling a little bit more with it. I'm going to keep using this system, tweaking it, but I feel like this is a good way for me to get across a more in-depth review. I need a synonym for in-depth because I feel like I've used that 10,000 times. A closer look at how I'm feeling and why this book is getting the rating that it is from me. So I hope you all enjoyed. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you've read this book and if you agree with some of the points that I made. And I hope you have a good day. Bye, guys.